Hello everyone, and welcome back to Silas Podcats, or welcome to Silas Podcats. I am slightly sick, which is obviously the best time to film anything. It's fine, everything is great. So, the video that I'm going to, or the books that I'm going to be talking about right now are 5 books that I read in January, and the reason I'm only talking about these 5 books, because I have read more books than that in January, is because they're part of a quote-unquote project that I'm doing for myself. The reason I'm putting that in quotation marks is because it's a very big and ambitious project, and there's absolutely no way I'm going to be able to do it in 2024 just like that. But I'm going to be trying my best to get as much of it done as possible. And the project that I'm talking about is trying to read a book from every single country, region, and what have you in the world. There's a lot of them. For tracking, right now I'm using a Storygraph challenge. I'm going to be linking that down below as well, so this is for editing Scylla, so she doesn't forget. And a few caveats, first and foremost. First of all, this is not an end-all thing, right? Like, you cannot just read one book from every country in the world and then think that you're magically a lot more diverse in your reading taste than you are. If you immediately gravitate back to just white authors, what are you doing? Second of all, obviously this is still very difficult to do. I have already included regions or contested regions in the list to a certain degree. However, a lot of countries have the ability to claim other parts of the world to not be countries. And those are usually then called contested regions, for example, because their reign of, being a country is contested by other countries surrounding them or countries believing they have supremacy over them. It's a bit dicey, to say the least. And third of all, because a lot of people still travel around a lot and live in different countries at different places, it can sometimes also be hard to narrow down which country you think a book quote-unquote belongs to, or which country an author quote-unquote belongs to. I'm going to be facing that problem in February most of all, because a certain author thought it necessary to live in 4 countries. What am I supposed to do with him? Anyway, so that being said, the system of reading one book per country is obviously not flawless, and if you only do that and then just, never look at these countries, these authors, or similar authors again, you're also kind of failing the challenge, in my opinion. So what I'm trying to say is, I am taking this challenge as a challenge to myself to read more diversely on purpose. I've diversified my reading over the past couple of years a lot, and I do really like my progress there, but we can always have more progress. So this is essentially what I'm using this challenge for. I'm first and foremost going through books that I already either own or that are on my TBR that I have easy access to, which is also why I'm pretty sure I'm not going to be able to do this entirely in 2024. Because I don't have enough money to buy approximately 200 books. That's not immediately happening. Especially because some countries, depending on where they're from, what kind of language people speak there, might not be available in languages I can read in, which would be German, English, French passably, and I might cry, but I could do Italian. That's what we're working with, right? Anything beyond that is impossible to me at the moment. So depending on how many translations are available for these books, depending on how many publishers have picked authors from these regions up, it might be impossible to do some regions as of right now. Which is why I'm going for the quote-unquote easy options first, which are the books already available to me from countries that either have a lot of translated works or that write in languages I can personally read in. That being said, I have managed to, almost by accident, read from at least 5 countries from this list in January 2024. So honestly, we're off to a decent start. And I'm just going to be talking very briefly about the books, how I liked them, and what my experiences were overall. So let's just go for it, I would say. I think the first one that I finished of the 5 was Days at the Morisaki Bookshop from Yagisawa Satoshi. This is obviously, if you know anything, this is a Japanese book translated into English by, let's have a look, Eric Ozawa. And it's very short, it's fairly short, and it's basically just about a woman, and I've forgotten her name already, Takako, who kind of like is in a bit of a life slump, to say the least, which is partially because her boyfriend is a piece of shit. And in order to recover from that, she starts living with her uncle, who owns the Morisaki bookshop, despite not having really been a reader up until this point. The book is all about reconnecting with family members, remembering that life, you can take a break every once in a while from life, but also about the Morisaki bookshop itself. It's about finding books you like, essentially, which is something that deeply resonated with me because I love books, or books about readers, or books about people finding joy in reading. I really, really loved those aspects of the Morisaki bookshop book. That made no sense, but we're moving on. As I said, it's fairly short. I think it's under 200 pages. Yes, it is. It's like about 150 pages, give or take. So, it reads fairly fast as well. And an interesting thing that I've noticed with Japanese fiction, which is probably the country I have so far read the most books from in terms of quantity, when it comes to countries that are not Germany, the US, or the UK. Something I've noticed in the writing style, which obviously could also partially be the translation, because so far I do believe I've only ever read translated works from Japanese authors. I think. There might be the stray one who does write in English, but the majority have been translated works, so it could obviously be the translation as well, but they have usually they have a very peculiar writing style that focuses very much so on the outside, I would say, rather than the inside, which I find very interesting. I know some people don't like that type of fiction because they feel very removed from the characters' feelings, they feel very removed from the characters themselves, but I personally really enjoy this, and in the Days at the Morisaki bookshop it was basically the same thing again. I felt deeply connected to the characters, despite the fact that the language sometimes seemed to intentionally keep its distance. I'm not entirely sure how these authors keep doing it, but it's fantastic. So I highly recommend Days at the Morisaki bookshop for people who like reading about people exploring reading. Also for maybe somewhat complicated relationships with other people where you're not entirely sure where they're coming from or what's happening there. And I also highly recommend this book for people who just need a break from life. Because Takako also needed a break, and she deserved it, and she got it. And honestly, isn't that just wonderful? Also, apparently, if that is correct, I still have to check that, but apparently the region where the Morisaki bookshop in this book is set in is the region with the most secondhand bookshops in Japan. So, if anyone needs a travel destination, why not that one? Overall, I really enjoyed my read with this one, and I hope that other people who haven't picked up this book yet will do. I don't remember which one I read next, so we're just gonna go with this one. This is The Vegetarian by Han Kang, who is a South Korean author. This was also translated, and the translator's name in this edition is Deborah Smith. So this is my second piece of translated fiction, and I'm gonna have to hold it like this because it's a library edition, and it's shiny. So, The Vegetarian is a very, very different work than Days at the Morisaki bookshop, so we're diving deep, deep into something else, because The Vegetarian is, at its core, a story about a woman trying to get out of an abusive relationship and situation, both with her partner as well as with her family, the only way she can. in case you haven't heard about The Vegetarian yet, because I do believe it is Han Kang's most known work, probably for a reason, because I personally thought it was fantastic. It's about this woman, I think her name is Yongyi, who suddenly becomes a vegetarian after having cooked a lot of meat in her life for her husband, after basically been brought up by a family who does eat a lot of meat. And all of a sudden, from one day to the other, she throws away all the pieces of meat in her fridge and starts going on an exclusive vegetarian, even honestly vegan diet. The book calls her a vegetarian. The diet also excludes eggs and milk, if I remember that correctly, so, you know, it's technically vegan, but honestly, that's not really the point of the book. The point of the book is that the reason she becomes a vegetarian, the reason she starts restricting her diet so much, is because she feels that this is the only way that she can actually control anything in her life at this point. The book is split into 3 sections, if I remember that correctly. The first one is in first-person perspective from Yongyi's husband, who is a piece of shit. The second one is third-person perspective, and I do believe it's, yes, it is past tense. This is kind of important. Past tense from the perspective of Yongyi's older sister's husband. And the third part of the story is from Yongyi's older sister Inhyo's perspective, third person present tense. And the reason, in my opinion, this is the way that it is, even though it is Yongyi's story, is because what is important is how other people perceive her. We never fully get an explanation as to why she suddenly and so drastically changes her diet. We never get a full reason as to what exactly happened to her, if this is a psychotic break, if this is her just having a breakdown in general, if this is her desperately trying to escape an abusive situation in the only way that she can find possible, which is controlling the only thing she can control, which is what goes into her body. We don't know if she's ever had a situation where she was traumatized by having to eat meat when it comes to her family. We do know what happens right now with her and what other people think about her because of those 3 different perspectives we get on her. They are harrowing. This book is very, very dark. I would recommend Days of the Morisake Bookshop for almost anyone. I'm only recommending The Vegetarian to people who I know can handle it. I will be honest here. There's abuse, both sexual as well as emotional, as well as physical, suicide attempts, forced institutionalization of the, you know, technically main character whom everyone revolves around, but the character who never gets a POV, or, like, not strictly gets a POV throughout the entirety of the novel. There's rape, very much on screen in a lot of situations, both marital rape as well as non-marital rape. There's cheating, blood? A lot. It's very, very hard to read, but the way that Han Kang wrote it is utterly captivating. So if you look up the trigger warnings, especially if you feel the need to do so, and if, after everything I've told you, you are interested in the book, I highly recommend it. I'm also very open to talk about this with anyone who I know personally who might want to talk about it while reading it, to, you know, offer emotional support and all of that. I adored this book. I have another one by Han Kang here. It's called Human Acts, I believe. I'm going to be buddy reading that with Steph this month. At least we said so. So let's hope it actually happens, and we both remember that we wanted to do that. And I'm really excited for that because the way that Han Kang wrote emotional scenes in The Vegetarian deeply gripped me, even though, to a certain degree, it felt removed from the main character again, because we never get Yongyi's perspective, as I said. We don't know anything about her inner thoughts and feelings beyond what she's expressing outright to other characters, and even there we could argue that the other characters might be misinterpreting what she says. Nonetheless, it was so fascinating to read, and it left open this entire field of like, speculation you could make about what Yongyi might be feeling at any given moment in time. So I loved it. Again, very different from the first one I was talking about, but oh boy. So yes, that was my South Korean novel, or author at the time, and my second book to be translated from another language into English. Third, I think, has to be this one, Lakiriboto by Ayodele Olofintuada. This is from a Nigerian author. And fun fact, apparently it is very easy to find fiction or non-fiction or just about anything in writing from Nigeria. Because for some reason Nigeria is one of the few countries that has over 20 books assigned to the Storygraph Challenge by various people attempting to read books around the world. I found that very funny. Alright, so let's talk about this book first and foremost. This book is, as the back says, a queer feminist thriller. And I picked it up because of that. I'm very easy to get when it comes to books like these. The thing that was so interesting to me about Lakiriboto is it is very much unlike any thriller I have ever read. Now, granted, I am not the biggest thriller person, I don't read that many thrillers, my biggest genres are still fantasy and sci-fi, but I do enjoy a good twisty thriller every now and then. However, the thing that I notice about thrillers more often than not is they seem very formulaic, which is fine. Formulaic fiction has its place everywhere, and, you know, the readers who enjoy that kind of fiction obviously enjoy that thing in particular about those books. And with thrillers or crime novels or anything along those lines, it usually feels along the lines of like, there's a definitive event that then starts cascading everything. And for example, there's a murder, and then someone else tries to clear up what happened there. Or with thrillers, you often have situations like people are moving into a new house and suddenly things start behaving weirdly. Maybe there's stalking involved, and it escalates from one moment to the next. So usually what you have is you have a steadily rising tension that at some point then gets abruptly cut, either because the book is over, or because the characters die, or because anything else happens in between. This is also usually where the source of whatever it is that happens gets revealed, and, you know, then we either go back happy, or, as I said, the book just ends in tragedy, which, you know, both are completely fine endings for a crime or thriller-related novel. That is not what Lakiriboto was doing for me, though. Because Lakiriboto talks a lot about the female experience, specifically in Nigeria, or well, the experience of people who are read as female. It also talks about discrimination that LGBTQ plus people might be facing. In this case, again, specifically women, but it kind of like broadens the horizon a bit more. It talks about surviving in an environment that is trying to, you know, reduce you to rubble, essentially. And instead of having one significant event that cascades everything into a steadily rising tension of a thriller, it basically just has a bunch of smaller events that you at first don't really think are that much connected, but then you realize they very much are. And the accumulation of everything is also not necessarily like a thriller where you have one abrupt rise in tension that then gets cut effectively and, or, you know, just goes down again, essentially. There wasn't so much one moment of pure escalated tension as there were several ones that then dissolved into each other. I don't really know how to fully explain this without going into full spoilers. It was very fascinating to me, though. I think, however, that this is also a bit, quote-unquote, dangerous, specifically for people who read a lot more thrillers than I do, and who see this and hear the word thriller, and go into it with a certain expectation. I still have to upload that video about reader expectations. I will at some point, but the point being, going into a book with expectations is something we all do, but it can also very much ruin your reading experience, because, you know, you expected something else to happen, and it didn't, because the book was going a different route. I loved that about Lakiriboto. I find the book very interesting, very fascinating. It is, again, very, very dark. There's on-page rape, there is incest mentions, there is, just in general, the fucked up patriarchy of everything. There's extortion, blackmail, people die, people get shot, people shoot themselves, there's drug use. There's a lot of things, really. So, Similar veins to The Vegetarian, I'm only recommending this book to people who I know can either handle it or who have read the trigger warnings and still go, that's my shit, I want to have that. So, you know, for those kinds of people, I definitely recommend trying this book out because I think it's very fascinating what Ayodele did with the thriller feels of this book. I do also believe it won a prize, I think, at some point. I forgot which one, though. But nevertheless, this book was fascinating. I really, really enjoyed it. And you know what? It's Black History Month right now. At least in the US. So, why not pick this one up? Yay! Alright, so we have 2 books left. We have 2 books left and 2 countries left. And I think I'm going to go with this one first. I finally read Minor Detail by Adania Shibli. This was also translated from Arabic by... your name, please. Elizabeth Jacquet. And it's very short. I think it's the shortest one of the ones that I've read because it only has 111 pages and it packs a lot of punches. Minor Detail by Adania Shibli was written by a Palestinian author, Adania Shibli, and it is about the Palestinian occupation by the Israeli government, by the Israeli military. And the story is essentially told in 2 parts, so there's 2 chapters to this thing. The first one is told from the perspective of an Israeli soldier, and the second one is various years later. We don't know how many years later, but at least 50, I would say. I think more than that. I think at some point she says something like a certain building was built in 2002 and it's fairly recent. So since the first part is right after the Nakba in 1984, that would mean it's at least 55 years later. And so the second part is told by a Palestinian woman who's trying to find out about the exact details that occurred in the first half of the book. The first half of the book is about a Israeli military regiment meeting a Bedouin girl, really, and mass raping her and then killing her. And the second half is about a Palestinian woman getting obsessed with this minor detail in history and trying to find out more about it because she feels like there's something that she's missing. The setup alone sounded hard, so I knew that, you know, I had to be in like a bit of a better mind place to finally read this book, but the way that Adania Shibli wrote this story is utterly horrific in the best way possible. There are so many themes and motives that continue throughout the story. The desire to keep clean, for example, and to wash with water, which is exacerbated by the Palestinian woman in the second half, for example, being in an Israeli in the Israeli settlement of Nidim, and finally being able to wash properly in the showers because they have enough water for her to do that. Petrol, the smell of petrol, is very much clinging to both characters, but there's also ways in which the first and second half completely differ, which are utterly fascinating. The first half is told in third-person perspective, the second half is told in first-person perspective, so we already have a shift in how to approach the characters, really. And the first part is also not necessarily told from the character's perspective, it is told through a somewhat omniscient narrator who is narrating everything that is going on outside while completely omitting most, if not all, of the soldier's thoughts. Another thing that's so interesting about this book is that there is basically no direct speech except for 2 instances, and both of these instances read like a copied speech and a copied manuscript, essentially. So they don't even read like something a quote-unquote real person would just say in, for example, a discussion they have with another character, which gave it this very removed feeling, in a way, of being removed from human interactions, from human communication, really, because there's no communication as is happening on page in the novel, which was really fascinating. The fact that the soldier gets to be in third person while the Palestinian woman gets to be in first person also really switched up how close you are to them as people. The Israeli soldier feels very wooden and mechanic, almost like not necessarily a person, but like a robot, essentially, whereas the Palestinian woman is painfully human. I highly recommend this book to anyone who can handle it. I'm begging you to read it. It's really short. It's really, really easy to get through. It's going to leave you with a lot of thoughts. I do feel like making a dedicated video on this at some point, because it made me feel so much. And there's so much to be analyzed when it comes to like literary analysis of this book in particular, because of the motives changing throughout, because of the perspective change, because of the way that keeping clean, the way that the scent of petrol, the way that traveling around in circles, the way that repetitive movement and repetitive storytelling is interwoven into the narrative is so brilliant that even beyond the quote-unquote educational content this book to a certain degree does provide, it's also just a masterpiece of literature. I'm so serious when I say this. This is a masterpiece of literature, in my humble opinion, and I feel like we should be talking about this. One of the reasons why I picked up Minor Detail, by the way, is because Adanya Shibli was snubbed at a German award in Frankfurt, where she was supposed to receive a German award for the German translation of Minor Detail, Eine Nebensache, which I highly recommend every German speaker, or every person able to speak or read German, to pick up as well, in solidarity to Adanya Shibli specifically, but also just because this book is a masterpiece. I really want to have the German edition as well to compare the different translations, because again, this is also a translation, this is the English translation of it, because I want to know what the translations focused on and how they differentiated themselves from each other. But just in general, this book is fantastic. It's incredibly bleak, it is incredibly sad, that's the point of it. But the way that Adanya Shibli wrote this is a masterpiece of art, honestly. So, please, do yourself the favor and pick this book up. And last but certainly not least, I have nothing else to hold in my hands because I've read a digital copy of this, because there's only digital copies of this book so far as well, and that would be Imago, a dystopian gothic by Matthew Zakharuk. Matthew Zakharuk is from Ukraine and is currently living in London, and I got to read an arc of their new gothic dystopian novel, Imago, and it was fantastic. I did a dedicated review on this, or well, I will be filming it later today, but it will go up before this video, I'm pretty sure. So I'm not going to go into too many details of it, but suffice it to say, I absolutely loved it. It's basically set in this almost fantastical version of, it feels a bit like a mixture of Soviet Union and Third Reich Germany, so that was interesting. And we follow our main character, Ada Kalinescu, who is invited to return to her homeland, or her home city, basically, because she's invited to be part of the university there for a course of study. And that's, the setting is incredibly isolated. The setting is incredibly isolated by geography, but also throughout everything else. Like, there's no real history lessons. There's nothing except what is just called the authority, capital A, of course. So it deals very much with this, this dystopian authority, that is warping everything, including history lessons, geography lessons, everything you might possibly imagine, but also magic lessons, into its own understanding of what the authority, and only the authority, thinks is essentially happening with people, and is essentially allowed to happen with people, is allowed to happen with magic. I don't want to give too much away, to be quite honest, because you really just have to experience the book, but it's fantastic. I gave it 5 stars immediately. I think I gave almost every single book on this stack 5 stars, except for Morisaki Bookshop, and I think La Kiriboto. I don't remember, though. But they were all 4 stars and above, so, you know. Imago also has a lot of trigger warnings. I do believe that Matthew has them on his author page, which I will be linking down below as well as the link to how you can get the Amazon ebook, because it's currently only available as an ebook, but it's fairly cheap, so, you know, it costs less than a coffee. I'm just saying. Get it. It deals with body horror, it deals with, you know, police brutality, it deals with an authority punching down on a lot of people. There's torture scenes involved, there's medical experimentations involved, there's monsters, and also monster fucking, which was fantastic and I loved it. And there is discrimination on a wide scale, but also on smaller scales, such as individual for the protagonist who is very much gay, but for example would need a specific allowance in order to be able to marry, because that way she doesn't have to have children. There's a lot in this book, let's just say it like that. I really loved the writing style, because the writing style is very visceral, but also almost secretive in a way. It doesn't really give a lot away, which is kind of the point of the book, because it is very abstract in some senses. And I really loved the magic system specifically, because it's both very much explored as well as absolutely not explored, which is the entire point of it, really, because it's so entrenched in the authorities dealing with everything that you cannot get a neutral view on it, so to speak. You cannot get a neutral education on the magic system, because everything people in this book, including our main character, know about the magic system, or at least, let's just say, roughly 80% of what the main character knows about the magic in this world, comes from the authority. So it's very, very well regulated on who is allowed to know what magic does and what magic doesn't do, which is a fascinating approach in my opinion, because I really love how different authors explore different magic systems, and it's very clear that the only reason the magic system is so well scripted in this world to a certain degree is because that's what the authority is trying to do. It's trying to script how magic is supposed to be used and how you can use magic, so everyone does use magic the way the authority wants them to. I was a big, big fan of that, not gonna lie. So, yes, those were the 5 books of, like, reading around the world that I specifically read in January. I read a lot more Japanese fiction than just Days at the Morisaki Bookshop, for example, because I also read a lot of manga. And I'm pretty sure that most of my other authors were from somewhere in the US, but I do want to try and choose indigenous authors for that country specifically. So, yes. As I've said, this is obviously not the most conclusive way to become a more diverse reader, but it can give you a starting point, so if any of you would like to join me on this quest, again, I'm going to be leaving the story graph, if you use Storygraph, of course, but I'm going to be leaving the Storygraph link to the challenge down below, so you can join whenever you want to. You can also finish whenever you want to. The challenge is not just, you know, restricted to 1 year, of course. The challenge goes on indefinitely for as long as you need. There's probably going to be a lot of suggestions within that list as well, which is always very nice, because other people can leave books they are reading for different countries. You might get inspired by that. I'm also going to be reading just about any genres, as you saw on the list right now. Some of them are set in the countries they're talking about, some of them are not. It is what it is. I do mostly read fantasy and sci-fi, so these will definitely make it on the list as well, and that means I will literally only be going from where the authors are coming from, which doesn't necessarily translate to them talking about their countries or homes or, you know, places of origin within that fictional work. Which, again, tells you everything you need to know about how much, you know, this challenge is only complete if you then also try and learn something more about the countries it's coming from, if that is your goal, because you cannot learn about other countries just by reading fiction. It can be a good starting point, though. So with that being said, this is the end of that challenge for January for me. In February, we're going to read more books. I'm telling myself that right now so I don't chicken out. And as always, I hope that you have a nice reading experience yourself, and you continue having a nice reading experience, maybe with this challenge, maybe not. And I will see you soon.